The Problematic Prince. It was in the afternoon, when the sun-warm golden disk, that the carriage carrying Bjorn and Leonid trundled out FO the main gate of Schubert Palace. They were off to visit the Duchess of Arsén at her summer palace. Originally, it was meant to be the Queen and Leonid, but it was changed at the last minute. "Your grandmother is very fond of you, Bjorn," the Queen said. Bjorn had been woken up right before lunch, to his mother's knocking on the door. She then proceeded to lecture him about late nights and drunken games. It seemed that the Queen sent him off to visit his grandmother as some form of punishment. As his mother said, the Duchess loved her first grandson more than anyone, so it was a little thing to bear this annoyance for a little while. It didn't help that Bjorn was just as stubborn in matters as his mother, and that annoyance quickly became hatred as they bounced along the road. "Thanks to you, it should be a fun evening," Leonid smirked. It was hard to judge Bjorn's mood at times. He remained so stoic at times, with a glint of a random smile. Even Leonid, who had dedicated his life amusing himself with Bjorn's discomfort, found it hard to judge his brother's mood. "At least I will get a decent dinner out of it," Bjorn said. "Only because she still loves you. Despite everything, you're still her favorite," Leonid said dejectedly. Leonid referred to the incident with Princess Gladis, and Bjorn felt heat rise against Leonid for bringing it up. The Duchess had barely spoken to Bjorn since the divorce. She accepted him at the table, tolerated his company when she must, but she was not as communicable as she used to be. "You could always tell her the truth," Leonid went on. He sat forward, hands clasped like he was at prayer. Bjorn looked out of the carriage window so that his brother wouldn't see the dejected snarl. Beside the Lars royal family, there were only 3 people in the whole kingdom that knew the truth: the king, the queen, and Leonid. 4 if you count the bastard Gladis cheated on him with. The Duchess resented him for his act. It might not have been so bad if he had just divorced Gladis, but his abdication from the throne, making Leonid the crown prince, seemed to properly upset the Duchess. Leonid tried to refuse the position, claiming that Bjorn was a much better suit. Whenever he thought about the situation, Leonid felt terrible for his twin brother. He could never be like Bjorn, the one who taught Leonid all about how a single person could be heartless, responsible, distrusting, and considerate all at once. The carriage moved across the bridge. Leonid had buried his nose in a book, and Bjorn was still staring out of the window, not really looking out at anything, but looking in. The bridge reminded him of the time he met with Erna to return his coat, right before the Heinz scandal blew up. "What were you going to do if I didn't show?" Bjorn had asked Erna. "Come back tomorrow, I suppose," Erna replied. She answered like it was a matter of course. "There is only one road out of the palace and to the city, so I figured you'd come past here eventually." Her own logic had frustrated Bjorn. He had not expected her to be. He felt like she was a match for his wits, and she was fiercely independent. When they had arrived at her street, she hopped off the carriage like it was some ordinary thing and refused to let Bjorn see her off. She was so proud of the fact that she knew how to ride a station wagon. She made it sound like some great achievement. She left a modest farewell, like she was saying goodbye to her grocer, and crossed to the other side of the street. When Bjorn moved on, the woman didn't occupy much more of his thoughts, or at least, he didn't think she did. As the carriage passed the middle of the bridge and his mind was cast back to that day, he realized his thoughts had lingered on her more than he realized. "Who is she?" he muttered to himself. Leonid looked up from his book and out the window. Who?" he said, but Bjorn ignored him as he caught the sight of a brown-haired woman. He felt anxiety race up his body. The disappointment stung as he saw it was only a woman that reminded him of Erna. A table had been set up for the Queen's guest deep in the garden annex. Isabel Dniester, the queen, greeted Erna as she was escorted by footmen. It was as if they were two close companions set to enjoy afternoon tea together. "You may go." The queen waved away the footmen. As the servants left, the garden was draped in an awkward silence. "Shall we have tea?" the queen said and offered Erna a seat. "Oh, yes, of course, Your Majesty." Erna hurriedly took her seat and picked up the teacup, waiting patiently for the queen to take the first sip. She then took hers. She was frightfully aware of her trembling hands. The queen examined Erna Hardy over the lip of her teacup, worried that the poor girl was going to spill her tea and burn herself. This was a very different encounter than when they had met at the social gathering, probably because of the lack of the old-fashioned dress and makeup. A couple days ago, the queen had sent out investigators to covertly gather all the information they could about Erna Hardy. They returned with a thick report of the woman's history, information of the two families, Baden and Hardy, and all the gossip and scandal they had been involved in. Erna was a lady that sported the Hardy name, but she had mostly been raised by Badens, a righteous and good family of aristocrats. Although they had fallen on hard times, they lived without losing dignity. The information in the report claimed that Erna Hardy was a very different person to what the rumors suggested. So curiosity took the better of the queen, and she decided that she wanted to meet Erna in person. "What is our relationship to my son, Bjorn?" the queen asked. Erna looked up from her teacup. Confusion spattered her features and looked at the queen with big, beautiful, deep blue eyes. It was no wonder she had caught the attention of all the socialites. "Tell me what happened between the two of you, Miss Hardy, and you had better not try to deceive me." She had told the queen everything, in as much detail as she could, about her and Prince Bjorn. At times her mind went blank, but she never lied or knowingly distorted the truth in any way. Erna hoped it would help clear up any misinformation. "Are you really saying Bjorn wanted that?" the queen said, after she heard everything. The first time the queen expressed any emotion or thought on the matter was when Erna told of the lost gold antler trophy and how Bjorn had agreed when Erna offered to pay for it. Erna spoke like she faced a terribly biased jury, and she was pouring her heart out to prove her innocence. She even told the queen that she was going to pay off the debt by selling corsages. The hope that a lady of aristocracy would stoop to such a level to pay off a debt, would it be enough to convince the queen she meant no ill? "So, you really sold artificial flowers to pay off the trophy? Bjorn really accepted that? My Bjorn, the prince?" Erna wasn't sure what the queen wanted her to say. She seemed completely disbelieving. She smiled dejectedly and left it at that. Once that was done, her time with the queen passed like any run-of-the-mill afternoon tea Erna had attended. The queen skillfully led a daily conversation, as if talking to a long-lost friend, and they were catching up on old times. The prince's name was not mentioned again. Lisa's nerves spiked when she heard the clip-clop and the rattle of carriage wheels. At first, she was elated. Erna had finally returned from the palace. Then her dread took over. What if the Viscount had returned already? Relief washed over her as she saw the same carriage that had kidnapped Erna come around the bend. She nearly fainted. "I'm back, Lisa. My lady. I don't want to think about the royal family anymore." "Look over there, she's finally here," Peter declared. He was examining the crowd with wide eyes, scrutinizing every face he could, daring not risk missing the opportunity to see the young lady that was the main character for today's festival. The Hardy family had just entered the stand, and with them was Erna Hardy. "I knew it." While laughing at the crowd's reaction, Leonard was also relieved. If Erna had not shown up once in a while, all the young lads would have degenerated into mindless idiots, obsessing over mythical phantoms. "Pest, Bjorn, look there," Peter whispered to Bjorn. Bjorn leisurely turned his gaze towards where his friend motioned with a not-so-subtle finger. He saw the woman that was his straight flush, Erna Hardy. Bjorn brushed away Peter's silly behavior and dipped his eyes. His long eyelashes veiled his eyes, and Bjorn let a smile softly curl his lips. "Huh, I see she is here," Bjorn said softly. When Erna turned her head, her eyes met Bjorn's. They exchanged polite nods and a half-hearted smile. He could not help but notice how pale Erna looked. He had thought the news of her ill health had been excuses, but seeing her now, he might well believe the stories. She was still beautiful, though. After that, Erna didn't know where to look and turned back to face the front. She was a distance away, but Bjorn could still see she had blushed. The announcement for the start of the match sent the crowd into a cheer. Bjorn took off his gloves and leaned on the back of the chair in front of him. He was not watching the match. His attention was on Erna, and as the noise of the crowd died down, she looked over her shoulder. Their eyes met, and Bjorn's whole world became just her. She looked surprised he was looking at her, but to him, the whole world melted away, and only she was left. The gardens of the palace was where the nobility and the upper caste had their party. They boasted a full orchestral set playing soft, ambient notes, and even the buzz of conversation sounded more dignified, with lordly men guffawing into their fists and ladies tittering behind fans. Gladis put down the glass of champagne she had not taken a sip of. She was filled with old memories of growing up in these gardens and the palace she had spent her honeymoon in. She wished she could turn back time to relive her childhood and encapsulate more pleasant times. That's when she sees Bjorn, and her eyes turn red as she sees him with his friends. They were telling jokes amongst themselves and laughing. Their attention seemed overly focused on the Hardy family. Not the Hardy family, but the young Hardy girl. She was, as the rumors suggested, a beautiful woman. Jealousy twinged at Gladys' heart as she noticed that Bjorn was also paying particular attention to the young woman. Her heart ached, and she knew there was nothing she could do about it. She had never been in love with the old crown prince. Even when they were married, she knew their marriage was one of politics and the union between Luchen and Lars. There had never been any love between them from the onset, but Gladys was still so proud that she was going to get to marry Prince Bjorn. He was the most handsome and the most noblest man she had ever met, and growing up surrounded by love, being in a relationship with none was strange. Being around Bjorn made Gladys feel insignificant. He was a man that never dropped his smile and was always of an amiable demeanor. He never once showed passion or genuine love, and after they were married, Gladys realized why. The crown prince didn't care less who the crown princess was. Bjorn resembled the sun, a brilliant midsummer sun that blocks out all other light, including Gladys, who became lost in Bjorn's radiance. Gladys. Louise's voice crept into Gladys' consciousness. Don't pay any attention to that woman. She has no shame, even after all the scandal she has caused, Louise said. Louise noticed where Gladys was looking and tried to lift her spirits. Erna was looking around like an excited child. Her innocent face was a stark contrast to Gladys' pensive look. It's fine, Louise. I'm just going to go say. Nonsense. You can't speak to that woman, Louise said. It's fine. It's what's expected. We can't just ignore the young Miss Hardy, Gladys said. Erna did not notice the princess and her entourage approach and was busy looking about the party and taking in all the sights. Gladys stopped in front of Erna, who finally looked around and saw the princess. Their eyes met under the colorful tree. Good evening, Miss Hardy. It's a pleasure to finally meet you, Gladys said, breaking the silence. Erna was frozen to the spot, when she noticed the actual princess was talking to her of all people. It was because of the prince. Erna realized that the moment she saw the princess before her. The princess, who was once married to the prince, must be well aware of the scandal involving the pair. "Miss Hardy," Gladis said when Erna didn't reply. Erna came to her senses and hurriedly stands to offer the princess a polite curtsy and stumbles over any number of polite greetings. Erna was breathless at the idea of how far and fast rumor was going to spread. She wanted to pass the time as fast as possible and get out of this spider's web. Just like her time with the queen, Erna found herself being led through a polite conversation as if two very best friends were idly chatting in a tea room. "I hear you don't have anyone to keep company with. It must be very lonely for you, Miss Hardy," Gladis said. She gave side glances to Bjorn as she spoke words laced with false sincerity to the ostracized country girl. He did not seem to be paying them any attention whatsoever, being more concerned with whatever spectacle Leonard was getting involved in. Her brief conversation with Erna led Gladis to believe there was no merit to the rumors, and with that revelation, she suddenly felt genuine sympathy for the young girl. She was also filled with guilt at the thought that Bjorn had used the girl to get at her. "Do you like theater, Miss Hardy? A play?" Erna asked in surprise. "Yes," Gladis smiled as if considering a playful puppy. "In 10 days there is a charity show to raise money for the orphanage. I think it would be nice if you were to attend." It was cruel to add any edge to her offer, and besides, it wasn't the girl's fault that Bjorn could be such a monster. She wasted to at least attempt to befriend the country girl and provide her with salvation in their friendship. Of course, Louise and the others would not understand. That is. Erna stumbled over her words, looking for the right way to deny the princess.
"I'm sorry, princess."
In contrast to her hesitant words, Erna's voice is calm and clear. Gladys' eyes burned at the unexpected refusal. It was the first time she had lost her composure since the start of the conversation. "I am really grateful for the invitation, but I don't think I will be able to attend the play. I'm very sorry, princess." Erna finally found the words. Holding her hands in her lap, Erna gave a polite bow. When she came back up, she pursed her lips as if she had more to say, but never let the words pass. There was silence enough that they could all hear the onlookers whispering amongst themselves. The daughter of the Hardy family just insulted the princess. None of the criticism reached her ears as embarrassment separated her from the world around her. She had no idea what she could have done wrong. Was it etiquette of these socialites not to refuse invitations in public? Erna was unsure, but in all her training and reading, she had never come across anything that suggested that. She knew it was rude to falsely accept an invitation, knowing she would not be in town for the show. Was it her tone, or maybe even her attitude? Erna couldn't tell Gladys the real reason she could not attend, so she thought it probably was. She still couldn't tell the princess that she was going to be running away in a week. still dazed when their walk led them to the end of the road, which stopped at the riverside. An aqueduct ran from the canal to the great fountain. Its arches, decorated with flowers and more colored lanterns, made the whole scene look like a dream. "Miss Hardy," Bjorn said softly, "did I do something wrong to the princess?" Erna asked immediately, before Bjorn could take the conversation over. She looked up at him with pensive eyes. "Did you fight with the princess?" Bjorn asked. He wore such an absurd smile. "No, never," Erna said hurriedly. "Well, I heard you declined her invitation." "Yes, did I do something wrong?" "It was for a charity play, but Erna stopped herself before she gave the plan away. "Nothing concrete that I've ever seen, but given Gladis' high statues, it's probably an unwritten rule, especially to decline to her face, in front of her peers," Bjorn said through a sly smile. "Really, that is bad," Erna said. The blue of her eyes deepened to a sadness, filled with regret. "Maybe," was all Bjorn said. Erna let out a desperate sigh and lowered her head. "I can't attend the performance. What else could I do?" Erna sounded desperate, like someone trying to prove their innocence without evidence. "Why?" Bjorn said. He looked down and considered Erna's pale face, which seemed ever more pale in the colored light of the lanterns. Erna became lost for words. She avoided the prince's gaze, for fear that he would see into her eyes and know the truth. He would realize she planned on running away and would probably tell her father. She had to keep her plan a secret. So how was she going to prove her innocence? There was an unpleasant moment, an awkward silence between the two as Erna warred within herself. He is the prince and he had good memories of Erna. She did not want to leave him with this one bad memory of her as an inelegant and rude woman. There was still debts to settle between the two of them, and Erna desperately wanted to talk to someone about running away. Erna finally broke the silence with a soft squeak of a word. "I am leaving Schubert in a week," Erna confessed. "I am returning to Beaufort to be with my family." Erna held her breath and Bjorn looked at her with a FLT expression. He showed no sign or reaction to what she had just told him, so she continued. "If I had told the princess that I would attend, knowing that I would not be going, it would have been a lie. I didn't want to lie to the princess." "Why didn't you tell her?" "I can't do that." Erna lowered her head and her voice to a whisper. "It's a secret," Erna said softly, so no one could overhear. "A secret," Bjorn whispered back. "Yes, I want to leave as quietly as possible." "Why? Are you planning on eloping or something?" There was just in Bjorn's voice. Erna's eyes could not hide the nervousness she felt and she swallowed dryly. She clearly did not share the same humor as Bjorn. Bjorn stared blankly at Erna for a long moment, then burst out laughing. He realized she really planned on running away, and over everything else, Bjorn realized something. Erna was a simple, naive country girl who really didn't understand how the world worked. Bjorn's laughter attracted the attention of couples and groups that had gathered nearby to watch the fireworks. The world suddenly seemed more beautiful, if only in its cruel twists of fate. Bjorn laughed at the idea of Viscount Hardy dreaming of selling his daughter to revive his fortune and status. He laughed at all the old men rubbing their hands at the thought of getting their twisted fingers on Erna's delicate flesh. Bjorn laughed for a long time. He could feel the surprised onlookers staring at him in bewilderment. He didn't care about them, and when his laughter subsided, he looked at Erna like she was the only person in the world. She seemed embarrassed by his sudden mirth. "Why would you tell me this, of all people?" Bjorn said. He still had a small smile as he looked down at Erna. At first glance, she seemed timid and shy, but deep down, she was strong and firm. Her pale face, blended with the colors of the lanterns, was cute and underlined with pouty red lips. "What if I accidentally mess up your plans? I know the prince is not like that. You know? Miss Hardy, you know me?" Even though Bjorn's tone seemed to be spiteful, Erna could see there was still a soft smile in the corner of his lips and on his eyes. Erna nodded without hesitation. Blind faith seemed to be a tradition of her family's. "Even when I leave Schubert, I will not forget my debt to you. I will pay you back, my prince," Erna said. "Debt?" Bjorn feigned trying to recall. "Oh, that. You don't need to worry. I will pay back every penny. I promise, on the honor of the Baden family." That name again, the woman was acting like it was her name. It was unfamiliar, but at least it was a name that higher prestige than Hardy. Bjorn readily agreed. The woman's wild plan to sell artificial flowers to pay for the debt had been working so far. Would it still if she decided to run? A soft breeze blew off the canal and wrapped around the pair as they stood in silence, looking at each other. Bjorn looked out over the water, following the sound of people laughing on the boats that had just set sail. It was time to close the bet and collect his winnings. "Would you like me to scrub your debt?" Bjorn looked back at Erna. "It's difficult to run away when you still have debt anchoring you to this place. Come to think of it, that night only happened because of my rudeness. It's not very gentlemanly to shift the blame to an innocent lady, such as yourself." But Erna was shocked. This was not what she was expecting. "Let's make a deal," Bjorn said with a benevolent smile. "Afford me the honor of enjoying your company on the Abit River tonight, and if you do, I will wipe the debt." The prince looked so relaxed when he asked Erna out onto the water, like he knew what she was going to say before she said it. Erna had warred with herself over clearing the debt or maintaining her family's honor. Clearing the debt inevitably won, and the prince reached out his hand to help her onto the boat. Erna hated him for what he was putting her through and the clueless manner in which he conducted himself. Erna sat at the prow and looked down at the hand that was still holding hers. It felt like a dream, a distant thing happening to someone else. The gentle lapping of the current against the boat seemed to dictate the thudding of her heart and harmonized with her breathing. Bjorn skillfully rowed the boat out onto the water. Erna watched him with wide eyes. She was so close to him. When Bjorn noticed she was watching him, the corner of his mouth twitched upward. "You're not scared, are you?" "No, not at all," Erna said, a little too firmly. Even she was not convinced by her answer. Bjorn laughed as he pointed the boat in the direction of the colored lanterns. They were of so many different shapes, some of paper and some of glass. They were all the colors of the rainbow, which blended to form new colors not of the rainbow. Erna watched the lights and colors spread around her in amazement. She had never seen such a splendid sight in all her life. Her grandmother was right. The city really does lift your spirits. She had not realized before, concentrating so much on what made the city a poor place to live. The overwhelming beauty of the lights, reflected in dazzling shimmers on the water, erased all thoughts. All the whispering onlookers, the gossipers and rumor mongers seemed so very distant now. She didn't even care how angry her father was going to be when he heard about this. It all felt so very distant. Erna cast her gaze about the river, trying to take in every mote of detail, committing every part of it to memory. When she realized she was staring directly at the prince, and he looked right back at her, she reflexively touched the side of her face and knew it was careless. She needed to say something to break the awkward silence they shared, but she couldn't think of anything. It would be nice if he would say something rather than just look at her with that soft little smile of his. It was a face after all, Peter declared. He watched Bjorn's boat drift out onto the river and saw that he was not alone. He was with Erna. He had sent flowers, passionate letters, and made eye contact from time to time. He had put so much work in wooing Erna and Bjorn. The man who spent his entire time on the sideline watching was going to be the one to lift the trophy. It was his face. It had to be. It was the only conclusion Peter could come up with. He had not written a single letter. He had not sent a single sincere flower, and yet, Bjorn was the one who was going to claim victory. What fool put him up in the first place? Peter said, "If I remember correctly, it was you." Leonard said, "Me? No way." Then Peter remembered. Sat at the gaming table, well on his way to drunken unconsciousness, a huge pile of chips in front of Bjorn, and the feeling of desperately trying to grasp a win. Unbelievable, I should have known. He always sweeps up the stake. Peter said dejectedly. Bjorn had always shown sincerity when it came to money, and he was a well-known flirt with flamboyant women, and when he tossed in his chip out of frustration, Peter felt sure he would not put the effort into courting someone as meek as Erna Hardy. He felt sure she would be too much work for him. Bjorn never went after women. He always let them come to him, and they always seemed like they would have hung themselves for the prince. Peter had watched him for decades and felt so sure of himself. Could he be serious about Erna? Peter muttered to himself. "What's that, you crazy bastard?" Leonard laughed at him. "Yeah, as crazy as he is," Peter said and laughed back. "You row very well," Erna said. They had been sitting in a deafening silence for so long, and Erna was losing her mind. She handed over the words carefully, as if breaking the silence was a sin. It felt right to start with praise, one of the most basic polite conversational skills. "You should row in next year's competition." Rowing on the river and rowing in a race were two completely incomparable events, and Erna felt a little silly for suggesting it, but she needed to say something. It was hard to bear this suffocating silence. Bjorn seldom seemed willing to talk, so she tried it out herself. "Yes," Bjorn said. It was a lame attempt, limping out of his mouth with the minimalistic effort only a man not interested in conversation would use. He still replied to her, and Erna felt a little relieved. This was well on its way to becoming a successful conversation. "Do you like rowing?" The next step in polite conversation is figuring out each other's likes and dislikes, finding common ground and building towards it. She remembered that young men like talking about sports. She didn't, but the teachings of the speech book she read back in Beaufort also said that young men like to talk about themselves a lot. "No, not really," Bjorn answered without much thought. Erna had been proud of her ability to follow the step-by-step guide. The teachings of the book she read were not much good in a place like Beaufort, but this had thrown her off. She fidgeted with the hem of her skirt. "Ah, why is that?" She put the words together like a child figuring out a puzzle. "I don't like the sweat and stink of other men so close to me," Bjorn said. From his tone, it was clear that he was not joking. This whole ordeal was throwing Erna through a loop. Did the prince not learn social norms when it came to conversation? "But you do like beasts?" Erna was proud of herself for finding something to latch onto. "I read that you are a top equestrian and won several competitions." "Yes, because horses are beautiful. Compared to sweaty, stinking, beastly men, horses are dignified." Bjorn had stopped rowing, letting the oars sit lazily in the water. He watched Erna with a hand sagged over the end of the oar. "But why do you hate horse racing? I hear you own the fastest horse in Luchen, but rarely go to watch." Erna looked at Bjorn. Her eyes sparkled with the multitude of colored lights. "Oh, no, I'm not interested in watching other people ride horses."
No?
"Are you the type of person who prefers to participate?" "Yes." There was a brief pause as Bjorn squinted at Erna. You did a pretty diligent job investigating my background. Everyone knew Bjorn Yester. It was hard not to hear about the prince at even the most uncommon social event. Erna shrunk away, feeling like she had overstepped herself, but the prince only seemed to lean in closer to her. He moved into her sight line as she tried to look away, and their eyes locked. Her cheeks flushed, and she couldn't help but fidget with her fingers. "Sorry, Prince. Please forgive my presumption," Erna said. She regained her composure under his scrutiny, but couldn't remove the tremble in her voice. If he continued to tease her like this, she was going to throw herself overboard. "There's nothing to apologize for. I don't think you were being rude. But I offended. Let's talk about you." Bjorn cut Erna off. "It's not fair if we only talk about me." "Yes? Did you say you were from Buford? Are the festivals there like this one, too?" There was some sincerity in his voice, as if he genuinely wanted to know about Erna. He wanted to know about Buford, a place he didn't know existed until Erna Hardy suddenly appeared. Yes. Yes, but nowhere near as big and fancy as this, I don't think. I've never seen it." As if sensing his intentions, Erna answered with a relaxed smile. "You've never seen it, why is that?" "My grandma and grandpa didn't like crowded places, and sometimes the festivals were held in places too far away. Instead, my family would have dinner under the ash tree. We would make lots of wonderful things and delicious cakes. My grandmother made a very special rose wine every year that she let me drink from when I was 16. Erna remembered the disappointing taste of the wine she had been looking forward to drinking from such an early age. She loved the color of it and its smell of summer flowers. It always reminded her of grass insects chattering and dandelions caught in the breeze. Erna spoke in a distant voice as she detailed the annual summer dinner party. It felt like she was back there now, with her grandmother and grandfather. The smell of rich cakes and juicy meats. Bjorn watched her with interest as she lost herself in the memory. He realized why Erna Hardy considered herself a Baden first, as she spoke so fondly of her grandmother and grandfather and her home. She looked happy. Bjorn had never seen her like this before, and he found himself being drawn in by her smile. "It sounds beautiful," Bjorn said. It was nothing more than the appropriate response in praise of the woman's zeal, but Erna beamed at him for saying it. They looked at each other for a long while, right up until there was a sudden and resounding bang somewhere above them. Erna laughed her nervousness away as Bjorn turned his head up to watch the fireworks painting the night sky. At first, Erna was scared of the sudden menacing sound, but quickly fell in love with the explosion of colors. A streak of bright light rose up from behind the palace and bloomed a vibrant red in the sky. The Feast of Colors was such a splendid display of beauty beyond comparison to anything Erna had seen before. "Wow," she said breathlessly. She innocently admired every streak of light, anticipating the explosion of color that would follow. It left after images in her mind as she watched with wide eyes. Each flash of light brought new details to the landscape. "Is this your first time?" Bjorn asked. A shower of golden sparks rained down to the ground and wiped out the after image of dandelion seeds. It was only then she remembered the prince was also in the boat. "Yes," she smiled. "This is my first time." She smiled brighter than the lights in the sky, and she felt the weight of the debt lift from her conscience and allow her to fully enjoy the moment. Bjorn watched Erna completely forget he was there. Gone was the demure she so carelessly wore like an old but familiar shawl. She was an excited child, and Bjorn laughed a little despondently. Erna was younger than Louise, but in the city, she was still of an age to be married. Come to think of it, Gladis was about her age when he married her. That was 4 years ago. They had been out on the boat, just like this, the only difference being that Bjorn felt like he had to do it as a social display to the people of the happy newlyweds. Now, he wanted to be here with Erna for no other reason than to share her company. There were other differences. Gladis was less than enthusiastic about the boat race, and when he took her out onto the water, her complexion went worryingly pale and she looked very out of place on the rocking boat. Gladis kept her composure till the end and reciprocated the love the people poured onto her as the crown princess. Bjorn recognized why she would make such a great fit as a future queen, but he could not picture her as a wife. He accepted the marriage to her because it was what was expected. It wasn't until a week later he found out why Gladis had been so sickly that day. He was going to be a father. "Congratulations, Your Highness. You will soon be a father," the doctor had said. The doctor was more thrilled about the pregnancy than Bjorn was. It had been a very hot and strange afternoon. He felt like a frog in a pan that was slowly heating up. He knew the child wasn't his. Bjorn looked at Erna, erasing the thoughts of Gladis and the tumultuous summer. She had a smile that made him feel like a flower blooming for her. The colors splashed on her face and caught as twinkles in her wide eyes. Would she really run away from her father? It didn't feel like she was making it up, being melodramatic to curry sympathy, but at the same time, she seemed too timid to do something so dramatic. His heart twists at the thought of her being an autumn bride, sold off by her father for profit. Bjorn was becoming tired of the falsities of society, the lies and rumors that spread from mouth to ear. There was rarely a shred of truth to the gossip. So where was the truth? At one time or another, he had desperately tried to cling to the truth, but it became like clutching a slimy eel among the rapids. In the end, he just let go, let the current take him away, let all the dishonesty wash over him and away. Here, in the boat with him, was the most beautiful woman. They were enjoying a wonderful night together, and although he found the fireworks boring, he had something else, someone else, to keep him entertained. Even if she was just being herself, he had won. It was a satisfying conclusion, he thought. The value of this woman's company far outweighed the lost trophy. Sure, in a few years, Erna might become a nostalgic thought like Gladis or simpler days, but for now he had a lot of fun with the pretty-faced girl and her erratic behavior. As the fireworks approached the end, they became ever more spectacular until the final climax saw an incredible display of light and sound. Erna had realized her hat slipped from her head and dangled precariously close to the edge of the boat. Embarrassed, Erna leaned out over the side and stretched for the hat. The boat leaned dangerously close to the water. "Hold still," Bjorn said. He grabbed her shoulder right as she felt herself about to pitch over into the colorful water. His movement was enough to send them the rest of the way, and they splashed under the surface. "Oh my, look over," people shouted from the riverbank. "There's been an accident," others shouted. Erna panicked as her world became drowned in darkness and muffled noise. She wanted to call out for help, but water rushed in and silenced her. She felt strong arms take her round the waist and shoulders and lift her up out of the water. Nearly out of the water, she could feel it lapping at her waist and thighs, and she was cradled. Her arms instinctively came up and around Bjorn's neck, and she held him tightly. Even though the panic and fear was still there, she understood that she was all right. She was no longer in harm's way. "Miss Hardy?" His voice came in clear amongst the buzz that filled her ears. She felt cold hardwood underneath as he laid her down on the jetty. "Are you awake, Miss Hardy?" Each time he called her name, the world came more into focus. The sky was dark now. No more blooms of colors, no more sounds, bangs, pops, and fizzes. Only the buzz. "Miss Hardy," she answered with a difficult nod, and the buzz around her grew. It's okay, Miss Hardy, Bjorn said. Erna felt like she was going to throw up and she coughed, which burned her lungs. She felt like they were on fire, and as the coughing fit continued, she vomited up river water. Her shame was complete and she blushed in embarrassment. Everything is okay now, Bjorn soothed and rubbed her back. He let out a long sigh of relief. The water from their two wet bodies soaked the decking of the jetty. It was an absurd accident, but she was lucky. Bjorn sat down beside Erna and brushed his wet hair out of his face. The other hand was still around Erna's shoulders, holding her close. She leaned into him. Bjorn couldn't tell if this was typical country girl mischief, or she really was as naive as she showed. Either way, she was a troublesome woman. It's a good thing now that everything is over. Bjorn finally let Erna go and she pulled away as he stood up. Those who had been watching them, seeing that they were okay, rushed in and started to make a fuss. Bjorn simply removed his wet coat. It's okay, no need to worry, we're fine, Bjorn said, stopping the eager attendants. He saw a group with onlookers. The group included Viscount Hardy and Princess Gladis and his parents. Bjorn looked over at Erna, who was heading away. She had given him a strong beginning and a great end. She really was a lady of unconventional social disturbances, turning up, causing a scene, and then flitting off back to wherever. It was just a shame she was so embroiled in affairs and scandals. He wished she didn't have to leave and hoped that she would lose the courage to run away, settle down in the city, so he could explore her friendship more. Either way, they had been here together and it was a good relationship. Is everything okay? What of Miss Hardy? Peter blurted. He and Leonard had heard the commotion. Bring my money, Bjorn said to Leonard. It was time to put everything back into place.